It's one of the biggest scandals ever to hit the NHS. 456 elderly patients died because they were given powerful drugs they didn't need.
Tonight, in this special edition of ITV News Meridian, the truly shocking and damning findings of a report into what was happening here at Gosport War Memorial Hospital in the 80s and the 90s.
Good evening. It couldn't be clearer tonight what happened here at the Gosport War Memorial Hospital in the 1980s and 90s. An institutionalised practice of shortening lives.
Well, today the families who knew something was wrong but were ignored were told they had been failed.
The findings of an independent investigation costing over £16 million has laid bare the shocking truth.
456 patients died because they were given opioids without medical justification.
200 more lives could have been shortened, but records are missing.
There was a disregard for human life. Consultants were aware but didn't intervene even when nurses raised concerns.
And Hampshire police investigations were too limited. Well, the panel was led by Bishop James Jones, who oversaw the Hillsborough investigation.
Throughout, the relatives have shown remarkable tenacity and fortitude in questioning what happened to their loved ones. The documents explained and published today show that they were right to ask those questions.
An NHS scandal that could have been prevented. The panel is now calling upon the government and the Chief Constable of Hampshire Police to act. The families want criminal proceedings.
Our reporter Andrew Pate, who has covered this story for almost 2 decades, is at Portsmouth Cathedral where the panel revealed their findings. Andrew, are you surprised by what you heard?
Shockingly, no. Throughout the years, the families have told me they've had major concerns and they feel at last they've been listened to. Ever since their loved ones died, their questions have met resistance. Today, they welcomed the findings, but say they want action taken.
Our vulnerable relatives who were stripped of their final words to their loved ones, silenced by overdoses, is more than catastrophic. This sort of behaviour going on in our NHS is both chilling and precarious.
This has been a 4-year investigation by the panel. The question is, why did no one act at the time? Who failed the families all these years ago? Well, the finger is being pointed at the senior hospital management, the police, healthcare organisations, politicians, the coroner's system, the Crown Prosecution Service, the General Medical Council, the Nursing and Midwifery Council. They all played a part. I've been carrying out my own investigation, looking into what happened during the 90s and the long fight since. These elderly patients died at the Gosport War Memorial Hospital in the 1990s, and their families have been fighting for answers ever since. Police investigations were launched. Medical experts talked of excessive opiates and unlawful killings. But as I found out, the families have been met by a wall of silence. 79-year-old Brian Cunningham was admitted in 1998. His stepson's been trying to find out exactly what happened.
He went into hospital on the Monday morning with bed sores and came out on Saturday in a coffin. It's utterly unforgivable, in my opinion. When I spoke to reception, asking where he was, I was told he was in dry-eyed ward, and somebody, a porter, I believe, said, that's the death ward, which I thought was a totally facetious statement and ignored it, quite frankly. 2 days later, I'd say he was totally unconscious when we appeared.
Brian's relatives say they weren't told a syringe driver had been attached. A syringe driver pumping in diamorphine. And when they wanted it removed, they claim the nurses and doctor refused.
I'd become concerned that he may not have known what was happening, and I wanted an opportunity to ask him, is this what he wanted? If it was, I would have walked away and accepted it. I wasn't given that opportunity.
These confidential documents, leaked to ITV Meridian, show nurses at the hospital raise concerns about the use of diamorphine back in 1991. Due to their complaints, a meeting was held in which the nurses said no other forms of analgesia are considered. The drug regime is used indiscriminately. Each patient's individual needs are not considered. And they felt that patients' deaths are sometimes hastened unnecessarily. In 2009, the nurses told an inquest their concerns were dealt with at the time. But Professor Richard Baker still has concerns. He was asked to examine deaths at the hospital during the 90s by the Chief Medical Officer. His report said a remarkably high proportion of patients had been given opiate injections. And in a small number of cases, the practice will be found to have shortened the lives of people who would have had a good chance of surviving to be discharged from hospital. Speaking to the media for the first time, Professor Baker told me he's concerned so many patients had "please make comfortable" written on their notes when they first arrived. What do you think they meant when they wrote "please make comfortable"?
I think they meant that this is a person who is not going to live very long, and we're just going to look after them through the process of death. When someone was admitted, often on the drug chart was written down the medication for a syringe driver. It wasn't necessarily started then, but it was anticipated that they would require it. But you didn't find in the records an assessment of why they'd reached that decision. And sometimes these patients would have been discharged from the acute hospital with the plan, discharge for rehabilitation. And they arrived at Gosport and they were immediately, "please make comfortable." And I think that left me with questions about what had happened, why is this decision made?
Dr. Jane Barton worked as a clinical assistant on the Dryad and Daedalus wards from 1988 until she left in the year 2000. We've obtained her resignation letter in which she wrote, "There's no such thing as continuing care nowadays, and palliative care is something that I do without a great deal of specialised backup." The current police investigation into a charge of attempted murder only serves to highlight the almost impossible task faced. No charges were ever brought. Gillian Mackenzie was the first relative to go to the police after her mother Gladys Richards died at the hospital in 1998, and has campaigned ever since, angry at the drugs her mother was given. She also says she'll never forget accompanying her mother's body to the hospital's mortuary, saying she can't understand the scale of what she saw.
There were shelves. They were piled high with bodies in shrouds, not even one on top of the other. You know, there might have been about 6 on a shelf with other bodies buried on top of that. And there were shelves and shelves. It was chock-a-block. I was shocked.
3 Hampshire police investigations were held, culminating in Operation Rochester. This confidential document shows a medical expert concluded the drugs were prescribed in a manner as to cause her death. And, as a result of being given these drugs, Mrs. Richards was unlawfully killed. Further investigations led the police to decide the expert's conclusions were flawed. Dr. Barton slammed the door in my face when I requested an interview, later telling me she wouldn't talk to the media, saying, "Over the last 20 years we have hoped for a fair and accurate reporting of the case, but have received harassment and vilification." Many of the patients who died at the Gosport War Memorial Hospital in the 1990s are buried here at Anns Hill Cemetery. The Bishop's panel was launched in June 2014, but their search was extended when more and more families came forward raising concerns. The panel eventually examining over 800 death certificates signed by Dr. Barton. Dr. Barton was found guilty of serious professional misconduct by a GMC panel, but wasn't struck off. The panel saying it had taken into account her 10 years of safe practice as a GP and over 200 letters of support. A number of nurses who worked on these wards in the 1990s have turned down the opportunity to be interviewed, but told me they worked tirelessly along with Dr. Barton to give the best possible care for extremely sick elderly patients. The families say today's findings show their concerns were justified.
Andrew Pate reporting there. Well, after today's report, the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, apologised to the families in a statement to the House of Commons.
He also talked about what happens now.
Handing over a loved one to a hospital, to doctors and nurses, is an act of trust, and you take for granted they will always do that which is best for them. Today's report will shake that trust. The police, working with the CPS and clinicians as necessary, will now carefully examine the new material in the report before determining their next steps.
Because of the World Cup, we have a shorter programme, but this special coverage of the Gosport War Memorial Hospital scandal continues live on our website. Please head to itv.com/Meridian now.
More reaction from the families. We'll also hear from the man who fought to get this story into the public domain. itv.com/Meridian. The weather, Holly Green.
Great Western Railway sponsors the ITV Meridian weather.
Good evening. We've got some lovely sunshine to come over the next couple of days. Through this evening, I think a bit more cloud for many of us than we have seen, and you might see an odd spot of rain. That's a weak weather front, and it's bringing in fresher conditions and clearing our cloud as the night goes on. So a lovely bright start to things for tomorrow. Lots of sunshine to begin the day, a touch of cloud bubbles up in places, but I think very nice. It should be a dry story, a bit of a north or a northwesterly breeze just drawing in that fresher air. Temperatures lower than today, but feeling very pleasant in the sunshine.
Great Western Railway sponsors the ITV Meridian weather.
Live vividly this summer with the ITV Pollen Count. Sponsored by Pyrenees Hay Fever Relief Nasal Spray.
And taking a look at our pollen levels, well, a lot of grass pollen around at the moment, so we are looking at very high levels as we head through the rest of the working week and into the weekend as well. Take care.
Welcome to ITV.com, where you're watching a special edition of ITV News Meridian on the day it was revealed that 456 patients had their lives cut short here at the Gosport War Memorial Hospital. A further 200 may also have died early, but their records are lost.
In the 1980s and 90s, they were given powerful painkillers they didn't need in what was today described as an institutionalised practice.
Well, the panel who looked into the deaths was established by the MP Norman Lamb when he was a health minister during the coalition government.
He was the one who got the Baker report published and then demanded this panel was set up. But as Fred found out, this nearly didn't happen.
When Professor Baker's report was finally published, there was a directive to say there would be no further action. You were on holiday at the time. What did you do? What was your reaction?
I just happened to open an email from my private secretary late in the evening, sitting by the pool. And the email said that they were due to publish the Professor Baker report the next morning, and that they would be announcing that there would be no public inquiry. And I was horrified that they were making this judgment. And when I opened and looked at the report, which had also been copied to me, I saw that some patients had gone into Gosport Hospital for rehabilitation and had ended up dead days later. And I just thought, we can't brush this under the carpet. And I demanded to see the permanent secretary as soon as I was back in the department. And that then led to the setting up of the Hillsborough-style panel.
Mr. Lamb, your reaction to the way the organisations involved have dealt with this whole matter? Scandalous.
I just think, how can anyone look those families in the eyes and justify this awful inertia? Just imagine if you've lost a loved one, a mother or a father or a grandparent, and not able to get answers to your concerns. And this awful sense of people in our country being ignored, not listened to. I felt completely shocked by that, and I felt driven to get answers for those families. And we will never have a well-functioning health system unless we're prepared to be completely open when things go wrong.
This whole business has cost millions of pounds. Is that money justified, do you think?
It would never have cost this amount had these issues been confronted at the time. And if they're not confronted, then we can't just allow individuals to suffer for the rest of their lives not knowing what's happened to a loved one. Justice delayed is justice denied. And I just always think about those families who've lost loved ones back in the 90s, remember, this is a long time ago, and have had to live with that ever since, and it's really shocking.
They've been badly let down, do you think?
They've been horrendously let down by government, by the NHS, and by all those who pursued investigations that never got to the truth.
Norman Lamb there revealing how he pushed for the Baker report to be published and how that led to today's findings from the panel. But they're not the first to have investigated what went on the Dryad and Daedalus wards here at Gosport War Memorial Hospital between 1988 and the year 2000. Back in 2002, the NHS watchdog was the Commission for Health Improvements. It identified a number of systemic failings. It said high levels of powerful painkillers were being prescribed without adequate supervision or checks. Hampshire Police carried out a series of investigations ending in Operation Rochester, which examined the deaths of 92 patients. No prosecutions were brought. Then, in 2009, 10 inquests were held, in which it was found drugs had been a contributory factor in half the deaths. The following year, Dr. Jane Barton was found guilty of serious professional misconduct by a General Medical Council panel, but she was not struck off. Then, in June 2014, the investigation by Bishop James Jones and his panel, leading us to today's report in June 2018.
Sangeeta, thank you. OK, let's now go back to our reporter Andrew Pate at Portsmouth Cathedral, where the panel revealed their findings. Andrew, the families got to hear what the investigation had found out before anyone else, didn't they?
Well, yes, they did. Behind closed doors in the cathedral, they heard from the panel and had a chance to ask Bishop James Jones and the others about the findings. For these families, it's fair to say, in some cases, it's taken over their lives. They've said to me they cannot rest until they get to the bottom of what happened to their loved ones. And today it's been proved they've been let down by the health service, the police, the government. So I've been looking at the impact this has had on these families who've campaigned for so long. For Gillian Mackenzie, this journey started on August the 21st, 1998, the day her mother died in the Gosport War Memorial Hospital. Soon after Gladys Richards passed away, her daughter went to the police claiming unlawful killing. Today, the 84-year-old is travelling once again from her home in Eastbourne over to Gosport for one of the family meetings with the panel. and she explained to me what first drove her to demand answers.
I have witnessed deaths before, but the way that my mother had been treated from the minute she got into the Gosport War Memorial Hospital, I had some very strong views about the way that the whole thing was being handled.
ITV Meridian has followed Gillian's tireless quest for the truth for almost 2 decades. A campaign which saw her enlist the help of her MP. He took her concerns to Health Minister Norman Lamb and has watched her battle for answers ever since.
I've asked her, why? I know it was your mum and it was, very sad, but Gillian, what's kept you going? And, her answers were all straightforward. She said Stephen gives justice.
Gillian Mackenzie was the first of the families to contact the police, and in recent years she supplied over 200 boxes to the panel, full of clinical records, correspondence and research. What did you think when other families came forward?
I was horrified. It was bad enough thinking of my own case and, trying to stop it happening to somebody else, but to think that it had been happening to other people.
But for some families, the answers have come too late. Ian Wilson campaigned furiously after his father Robert died. The 74-year-old was on nothing stronger than paracetamol at the QA hospital, but after being transferred to the War Memorial, he was immediately given morphine. 2 days later, he was on a syringe driver. Within 4 days, he was dead.
Well, for 10 years, I can't put this to rest. I want closure the same as everybody else. My dad died. I'd like to be able to sit back and think now, well, he died and that's what happens. But I've always got all these questions. Why did he die? What made him go downhill?
But Ian Wilson himself passed away 4 years ago. When the families began campaigning, I interviewed Jim Ripley and his wife. He died in 2007, but his wife told me she's sure he would have died 7 years earlier if she hadn't removed him from the War Memorial.
He was sitting up, propped up in bed with lots and lots of pillows, clenched fist, clenched teeth, out cold. A doctor arrived at 5 o'clock and he came out and said Jim had suffered a catastrophic mid-brain stroke and would not last the night. I said, well, so, okay, what are we going to do? And he said, well, we sit here and wait for him to die because he won't survive the night. And I said, no, we don't.
Mrs. Ripley demanded an ambulance take her husband immediately to the nearby Royal Hospital Haslar. Within 24 hours, the diagnosis was very different.
Well, the doctor at Haslar said to me, he says, no stroke. I said, what is it? And he said, dehydration and analgesic overdose.
Do you think if you hadn't taken your husband out of the Gosport War Memorial Hospital, he would have died?
Oh, within seconds. Oh, yes. Absolutely convinced. Yeah.
The Trust has always said it won't comment on the claims of Mrs. Ripley. Sadly, she passed away 2 years ago. 88-year-old Henry Aubrey had originally gone into the Royal Hospital Haslar with a chest infection. He was transferred to the War Memorial, with his daughter told it was for respite care. He died 2 days later. And that was 3 years after his wife Edith had died there. In an exclusive interview, Henry and Edith's daughter has told me she doesn't believe her parents needed such strong painkillers, and it shattered her confidence in the health service.
It's built a fear up in me. I don't trust the hospitals anymore. I don't trust what doctors are giving you to swallow. It's gone.
Gillian Mackenzie has been battling with cancer, but nothing has deterred her from fighting on. What would it mean to you to finally get to the truth?
that I have come to nearly 85 years, and this would be at least proof to myself that perhaps I have been able to help people.
Gillian Mackenzie there, and for her and all of the families who fought over the years, today has brought the answers they fought so long for. But now they want to know what is happening next. Earlier today I spoke to the MP for Gosport, Caroline Dinenage, and began by asking her, why has it taken so long for these families to get to the truth?
It's a very good question, and it's exactly the question that the families will be asking today. I became a Member of Parliament in 2010, and that was at least 10 years after these deaths had happened, and no answers had been forthcoming. There'd been a number of failed police investigations. The Crown Prosecution Service had decided not to go any further. A number of the inquests hadn't even been completed. The Baker report that had been written in 2002 hadn't been published, and it's taken all this time for the families to get the truth that they've been searching for all these years.
The families say your predecessor, Peter Viggers MP, didn't support them, and they feel you should have done more when their voices were being ignored.
I feel as Member of Parliament there is no more I can do. This result today, the fact that we got the Baker report published in 2013, the fact that we've had this Hillsborough style panel that has spent 4 years looking at that, has all been the result of the work that's been happening since 2010 as a result of my office and Norman Lamb and many others that have been fighting for this. But you can totally understand the viewpoint of the family. Nothing will bring back their loved ones. Some of my constituents have died waiting for justice for their family members. It's just utterly heartbreaking, but I'm so pleased that today finally we get to the horrible, chilling truth of what happened.
This independent panel has cost £16 million. Surely it would have been better for this all to be resolved years ago.
Yes, it would have been better for it to have been resolved years ago. There were so many missed opportunities. The report highlights not only this disregard for human life, this failure of care within the hospital, but it also highlights a failure of the number of different authorities to investigate this properly. So many different authorities will have to be looking very carefully at their behaviour over that period and asking themselves very, very harsh questions.
The families want more done following this report. Will you be supporting them?
100%, yeah. I mean, this report makes for the most heartbreaking reading. I think those of us who've been involved in this case all these years, I don't think any of us could have predicted the scale of this. Over 400 people, they say, died as a result of what happened, or their lives were significantly shortened as a result of what happened. That's unimaginable. Whatever the families want to do, I'll be with them 100% to support them.
Caroline Dinenage, MP for Gosport there. I know the families will be eagerly awaiting any developments.
Andrew Pate at Portsmouth Cathedral, thank you. Well, the families have been holding on to grief and guilt for too long, but persistent campaigning and challenging the authorities has made a difference.
So where are we today, and how can we be confident that we are in a better place with patient care? Sally Simmons has been looking at what lessons have been learned.
The guilt that Marjorie feels for letting down her mum, Dulcie Grace Middleton, still eats away every day.
If my mother had gone to hospital and died, but I'd known she'd been well looked after, I would have thanked the hospital. That would have been the end of it, and we would have all got on with our lives. But now we know that terrible things were happening.
The managers of the Gosport War Memorial Hospital said sorry in 2002.
And I apologise again today in public for the times when the standards of care at Gosport War Memorial for the families and the patients concerned fell below the standards that we would have expected.
But Marjorie, all the affected families wanted a change in practice to be sure this couldn't happen again.
The way that the families have been treated is almost unbelievably bad. There's been a lack of openness and transparency. Their integrity has been called into question. There have been barriers put in their way at every step of the process.
The hospital is now a different organisation with different personnel. But the Gosport scandal, alongside others, has already led to better patient care. Guidelines regarding the use of opiates have been strengthened. The National Reporting and Learning System promotes transparency, and last week Jeremy Hunt announced that every single patient death will be scrutinised by medical examiners or coroners.
The fact that we now work more closely with hospitals means that things are better. We're able to support doctors to provide safer care better. What happened at Gosport should never have happened.
Back in 2002, a tearful Marjorie begged for answers.
I think it's very sad and I need some peace of mind.
Today, finally, maybe she can begin to let go.
Well, that's it from us for this evening here in Gosport, on a day that some families never thought would come, a day others sadly didn't get to see because they themselves passed away.
All the fighting for answers was not done in vain. They were heard and listened to, as they should have been right from the start.
And at the very heart of it all, the grandmothers and grandfathers, the mothers and fathers, the husbands and wives, the ones they loved and lost.
Goodbye from all of us here, and thank you for watching.